Hi, friends. The current heated debate and discussions are all directed at how India can usurp China's place in the global manufacturing arena. COVID 19 and the geopolitical events of late have probably accelerated this thought process as global supply chains, including India, felt the insecurity of a large dependence on China. Let's face it, China worked hard to achieve that formidable dominance in manufacturing. The pace at which they created the infrastructure and scale and leveraged their resources to entice the entire world to buy from them is nothing short of phenomenal. Although just over 3 decades, our GDP and per capita incomes were not far apart. Today, China is 5 times that of India in both respects. Chinese students also went into mission mode across the world, acquiring skills and degrees and worked towards overcoming their only handicap, that of their grasp of the English language, which they picked up in due course. Post the free market reforms in the 80s and 90s, the people of China worked their hearts out in pretty much every area, while the Americans, Australians, Europeans holidayed and some wanted a 4 day week. Switch to India today, and one cannot hire even a decent tool room worker because most of them are not either competent or are sitting in call centers answering questions from technically challenged Americans. At the same time, the Chinese model of doing business had had its chinks, and post COVID, the compulsion for companies to shift to alternative manufacturing destinations has been catalyzed. The narrative is that China usurped the world economy, how they are not deserving, as they claim to be, how they are unethical by stealing all intellectual property, and how we are doomed if we do not stop downloading TikTok. The reality, though, is you cannot discount China. If India must take their place, it has to be a graded and strategic process of easing ourselves in and easing them out from the manufacturing arena over a period of time. Let's face it, shutting doors is definitely not the answer. I would like to share some other glaring facts that must be understood in the context of this discussion. China's investment in India is only 0.5% of the FDI inflows into India, or 18th amongst investing countries. Officially, it is 2.4 billion US dollars in the last 20 years, out of which 1 billion US dollars alone has gone into the auto sector. Unofficially, however, the Chinese investments were almost $6.2 billion dollars if you consider rerouted investments through Singapore and other countries, of which 4 billion US dollars have gone into technology sector. At the same time, this is still much lower than the investments coming directly from Singapore, Mauritius, US, Europe, UK, and Japan, etc. At the same time, China's export to India are barely 3% of their global exports. Now, that's some figure to think about. The Chinese business model, though flawless in terms of infrastructure, scale, technology, and efficient output, has the following blind spots. They prevent overseas businesses setting up base in China for cheap manufacturing costs to completely own the businesses and have silent or sleeping partners with no voting rights as a rule. They have issues with communication, especially with non Chinese speaking customers, prompting them to use interpreters who are not very communicative, either due to lack of understanding of business discussions or otherwise. They created scale and sometimes push clients to place high volume orders only. Due to lack of proper communication and at time ethics, they forced overseas clients to hire and station their own agents to ensure smooth transactions, which further added to the client's cost. The Chinese companies replicated patented technologies from overseas companies who set up base in China and created cheaper alternatives, thereby driving these foreign companies aground. The legal system, which is without any penal laws, favored the Chinese, and there was little or no chance for a foreign company to get a compensation or a reprieve. A case in point is when Facebook tried to customize their app for the Chinese, they were driven away. For that matter, Google, Twitter, Netflix were banned from China and Chinese clones replaced them. So much so that Facebook's rival, Tencent, in China, eclipsed Facebook with a market capitalization of 500 billion US dollars in November 2017. Their indigenous social platform, media, which is a social media platform, which is WeChat, is way ahead of Facebook in innovation and features. And so are the apps like Alibaba, Baidu, DJI. They're far, far, far more superior to apps being used in the Western world. Huawei was becoming a global threat through their 5G outreach. So, despite technology not having geographical boundaries, Chinese technology protectionism created monopolistic behemoths like the companies I just mentioned. At the same time, Chinese labor costs are treble that of India today, and perhaps a lever which we could use. The Chinese offset that, however, with much higher productivity. With global demand weakening and the Chinese economy growing in double digits for almost 2 decades, the entire world also looked upon China as a lucrative market to sell into and become largely dependent for survival. The Chinese currency was intentionally controlled to their advantage and they never let their exports become uncompetitive. However, over time, trading with China became a love hate relationship and forced people to look elsewhere. Manufacturing prowess was acquired by several countries as a result, which included Taiwan, South Korea, Turkey, Israel, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Cambodia, amongst others. With the sentiment to alienate with China, post COVID growing stronger now, all China centric companies woke up to reduce their dependency on China. With their rise of assertiveness in the South China Sea and confrontationist approach towards Vietnam, Japan, Taiwan, and more recently with India, all these countries became wary of the perils of working closely with China. But here's the point that is so important to understand and which is a big negative for India. Of the 56 companies that moved their base away from China over a year in 2018-19, Nomura reports that 26 went to Vietnam, 11 to Taiwan, 8 to Thailand, and only 3 came to India. Here lies the opportunity because today, if large manufacturing has to move out of China, India is the only country which has what it takes in terms of land and labor. However, as mentioned a little while earlier, no one can wish China away overnight. They are too deeply entrenched in almost every major economy. After the USA and China, India is the only large economy which has the propensity to grow exponentially to match the scale and diversity of a global supply chain. It is a myth that China can do what China can do, others cannot. We as a company export our entire produce of automobile components and we ventured into China to sell. Without much luck, as import was not a very favored term for them. However, what we did manage to achieve in subsequent years was to wean away and poach various global but China centric companies who were insistent on buying from China over a decade or so. It took us a while to convince them of our manufacturing capabilities, as they never knew that India manufactures world class products. And they were so engrossed in their China story that they would not dare look elsewhere. But once these companies moved their supply chain from China to us in India, they were convinced that India was a better supply source. Indian manufacturing capabilities, therefore, are, according to me, underrepresented or exposed to overseas markets. This perception must change. Here's another example of Indian manufacturing prowess. The market leader of motorcycles in Europe is not BMW, it's KTM, which is part owned by Bajaj. China is slipping fast not only in the manufacturing of bikes but also in the manufacturing of two wheelers and two wheeler components. Indian suppliers are beating them hands down. Between three Indian companies, Hero, Bajaj, and TVS, India today dominates the world motorcycle market. China did try and enter the Indian market with their motorcycles, but were driven away very quickly. The moot question always is, why was this not done in the case of TVs and appliances, computer, mobile phones, APIs, and pharmaceuticals, and other industries where we are still dependent on China? It's the same country, same labor laws, same infrastructure, but not the same entrepreneurs. Indian businessmen are characterized by a myopic vision. It's both short term outlook as well as geographically limited. Of course, the government also has a key role to play in making their vision global. When even ITI trained turners and fitters hesitate to work on a factory shop floor, when an insurance agent is paid more than an engineer, when typing code is mistaken for technology, when we have to contend with archaic labor and land laws, when corporate thinks local and not global, and finally, when you, the reader, will not send your son or daughter to work on the shop floor, each one of these factors is as responsible for our inability to challenge the Chinese dominance. We are largely to blame ourselves. Let's wake up to the reality that a 9 to 5 work day and long weekends will not take us there. We will have to slog it out. That's what China did. And Vietnam and Bangladesh and other contenders are doing now. So, what should be our to do list? To make India an attractive and a preferred manufacturing destination to the world, here's what we need to do. And since the speed at which we do is going to be key, we need to move very, very quickly. Number one, make things easy or ease of doing business. Make land, labor, electricity, cost of money, logistics, industrial and port infrastructure world class. And the speed of setting up a business and getting it into production an answerable outcome for the administration. Quick reforms in all these areas are very, very crucial. Number two, upskill a huge workforce to adapt to new technologies and manufacturing needs simultaneously. And this should be completely outsourced. Number three, MSMEs will be the biggest drivers of growth because they can grow exponentially. Let us start with at least an authentic database of MSMEs in the country. A lot of imports happen because we are not even aware that the very same product is being made within the country, somewhere, somehow. It is sad indeed. Next point, upgrade our MSMEs to world standards. A separate department and fund for technology upgradation and research and development will be crucial for doing this. MSMEs need direction and support with regard to, say, upgrading to global standards, especially to Industry 4.0, involving robotics, IoT, machine learning, artificial intelligence, data analytics, augmented and virtual reality, 3D printing, etc. And the resource of how to go about it must be made readily available. How then will the MSMEs be able to upgrade themselves if they don't have access to affordable, upgradable technologies? So, a suggestion here would be to take on board a multitude of retired professionals, engineers, technologists, and manufacturing personnel who, with their rich experience of several years, can associate with MSMEs and help them transform into world class businesses with continued handholding and at an affordable cost. And in addition, an advisory board of industry leaders from various large established industrial houses could act as mentors for handholding the progress of these emerging MSMEs. Our foreign missions, another point, our foreign missions spread around the world have a very crucial role to play as well. They need to showcase Indian manufacturing capabilities like never before. The perception of Indian manufacturing needs a makeover. They need to collect import data for their respective countries and share the same with the MSME and commerce ministries in India to find Indian companies who could become alternative suppliers to those imports. This would be a very effective matchmaking exercise. Another thing these foreign missions can do is, since a lot of companies in India would take years to acquire and scale up technologies, the time taken is going to be crucial. So, foreign missions can identify such companies up for sale or liquidation. Since post COVID, several companies unfortunately fell in that category. So, which in turn also can help Indian MSME companies acquire all these companies in up for sale or up for liquidation at cheap valuations and thereby grow inorganically, leapfrogging to global standards in a matter of months. Another point on how to go about competing with China is, let's play to our strengths. Focusing on industries where we are raw material rich would be a good start. Agri food processing can actually be a game changer for industry, since the global food supply chain is always hungry. The same would apply to the pharmaceutical sector, where we have a fair global presence as we are competitive, we have quality suppliers, and we would now also be in the same category in the electronic sector. We are already world class in the automobile sector, that is needless to say. It would be only fair to conclude that shutting the doors on existing and ongoing Chinese business projects or supply chains would not be the right approach. A measured, preferential, and structured play to gradually replace Chinese relevance would obviously be the more appropriate strategy. You cannot make everything, nor can you do all this overnight. It makes no economic sense to shun Chinese capital either, as long as these investments do not impinge on the strategic areas with rules to keep the ethics in play. We cannot afford violating contract terms and expensive litigation as long as our self interest is preserved. And we must take care of that. This calls for a very smart and calibrated and long term approach with a host of measures like adjusting tariffs, making favorable policy decisions to prop up and make Indian companies produce better quality at competitive prices so that their export potential increases simultaneously. And as I mentioned earlier, speed will be the key. To conclude, I leave you with a thought. About 2% of our population drives Marutis. Another 18% or so rides two wheelers. A large part of the balance 80% still ride bicycles. Is this not a dismal situation to be in? We could, however, not find a more opportune moment to change this and raise the aspirations and improve lives of every citizen in our country. Thank you and hope to see you again soon.